Welcome to Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Today we're discussing the latest adaptation of George Orwell's 1984, but unlike most adaptations of this famous novel, this is an audio-only dramatization. And if you haven't heard the hype, this Audible original production of 1984 is absolutely star-studded, with performances by Andrew Garfield, Cynthia Erivo, Andrew Scott, and even Tom Hardy as Big Brother. And it also features cutting-edge sound design, all in Dolby Atmos, which you can experience right now on the Audible app. So how did this project come together with such a legendary cast? And what was it like to actually record and mix this dystopian drama with all the necessary world building, but without the advantage of any sort of visual elements? Well, to help us explore that is today's guest host, Dolby's Richard Addis, as well as our guests, Joe White, who wrote the audio adaptation, the director, Destiny Ekaragha, Elon Ashgari, who collaborated on the music with Matt Bellamy of the band Muse, sound designer and founder of production company Granny Eats Wolf, Nathan Freeman, and the director of production and casting for Audible Studios, Marielle Runeker-Temple. That is a lot of guests here to discuss a lot of show. So without further ado, I'll throw it to Rich.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today to talk about the creative process behind the Audible original production of George Orwell's 1984. Immediately, it was super clear that this was a highly ambitious production. You just have to look at the incredible talent on the credit list. So can you kind of set the scene for us? You're sat in the meeting at Audible when 1984 is pitched for the first time. Was it an easy yes? And was the scope and scale of the production always there from the get-go?
Yeah. So, so to clarify, the commissioning editor at Audible is Robin Morgan Bentley, who is a fantastic big thinker and has recently taken over in audio drama and was really looking for our next kind of big ambition led title. And yeah, I think he actually came up with the idea of 1984 himself when looking around. I think 1984 is the best-selling classic book in the past year across print, ebook, Amazon. So and obviously it's a hugely loved book. There's been no major celeb-driven dramatization in TV, film, or audio for this title since the John Hurt movie, which was in 1984. And you know, what a time we're living in with kind of elections looming in both the US and the UK. And I think it just felt like the most incredible timing and worked so well with the idea for Dolby Atmos, because we were like, you know, if we could push the boundaries of Dolby Atmos in audio drama in any title, what would that be? And 1984 just seemed like an absolute no-brainer. So the kind of brief for us was to create a groundbreaking, definitive 1984, whilst kind of keeping the trust of the Orwell estate and the Orwell family as well. And to do that, we wanted to bring together the very best, obviously, of British creatives. We, different fields, bringing in the best minds from audio, TV, film. And really, that was the kind of first step. And there were these really exciting conversations with us where we were already just like kind of really buzzing about the idea as soon as it kind of came about. And then I think before Robin approached Joe, who I know from very early on, he was like, Joe would be, because we'd worked with Joe before on a different project, and we were like, this would be a great partnership. I think we kind of started to think about what we wanted our adaptation to look like. And obviously, ambition is high in terms of casting. We've got a track record of casting great actors across our audio dramas since the beginning of when we've been doing them. But we also wanted to kind of look at that, the role of Julia, for example, to give her the limelight she deserves, much more agency, and also our production really to kind of get inside Winston's head and the opportunities of how Dolby Atmos will help us with that even more. We wanted to kind of look at Orwell, but sexy. We wanted to kind of go to Room 101 for real. Like, what would that actually feel like? You know, Dolby Atmos is so immersive. But with that, I guess also thinking about what's really important in terms of kind of when to go big, when to pare it back. And that's what I love the most about Dolby. It's great for those big moments, but it's also incredibly good at those kind of realistic moments. So I think that's where it came from. And then the conversation started really early with Joe. And I know that Robin and Joe had a really kind of great relationship in working out and talking about the ambition for that. And then we knew like we were keen to work with Nathan and his team because we'd worked with them on a couple of big projects, and the sound design that Nathan created and his team on other projects was just so incredibly immersive. straight away from me, it was like, this is a no-brainer. This is the team we want to work with. So it was about putting those kind of creatives together, which has started the process. And then, the stars aligned on this one, and we had the most incredible team. And, it's not easy, but it was a great fun production. And, everyone was really enthusiastic. Everyone we approached, everyone we spoke to about it was incredibly enthusiastic.
Fantastic. Something you mentioned there, that you were kind of reaching out to creatives across the spectrum of kind of content areas there, so film and TV. So, Joe, you've worked across a whole range of different media, so TV, stage, radio. How did you find the process? I'm fascinated about how you approach adapting something as well known as 1984 for audio drama.
I read it for the first time only the summer before. Unlike a lot of people who've read it, sort of at a younger age and maybe have a different sort of relationship with it because of that. And even when I was reading, I read it on holiday, which it's not a good holiday read, I'll say that. I was already thinking about like my version of it. I didn't know in what medium that was, but I was already sort of thinking about adaptation. And then, I got a message from Robin, kind of out the blue. I'd worked on a show called The Knox with Audible, which I had a lot of fun doing, which has sort of shades of dystopian, futuristic sort of vibes. I got a message from Robin just saying, how would you feel about adapting 1984? And I was like, I'd eat my own glasses to do it. It was such a weird serendipitous thing. And the big pitch from the get-go was how to move sort of third person narrative into an intimate sphere and make it first person. So moving that sort of narrator's voice, which is like the sort of Orwellian narrator, into Winston's voice, which actually in some ways aligned really easily. They've got there's a similar sort of sardonic sort of study of society that both I think Winston shares with that narrator voice. So that was kind of easy to align. And then there were some things which were a bit trickier, which was making the sort of relationship with Julia front and center, and also playing with what that was to be inside somebody's head, which is perfect for audio because it's such an intimate experience between character and audience. I think, in many cases, people are listening to it with something physically in their head anyway. You are literally in people's heads sometimes. And so to sort of establish that relationship and that sort of connection so that it feels really quiet and intimate and private, like you're being let in on a secret, and actually you're complicit in the secret as well, in the thought crime, that then the stakes become really high when you start to play with what else can get into that space and that relationship between character and audience. What if somebody else's voice can come in, or what if things can be altered or changed? And it's sort of about that battle. For me, it was always about that battle. So that was the sort of big pitch, really, was the love story, getting inside Winston's head and being able to tell the story via him. And then as soon as I thought of the sort of ending, no spoilers, the shift in who is allowed to speak to the audience, I was like, that's it. That's the end point, and I know where we're going. So it was just a really exciting sort of process to be able to, there are certain pillars in it that that are sort of like tent poles of the storytelling that everybody sort of knows without knowing. There's so many cultural references to it in loads of films and TV and everything since, and the real world. But it was really fun to also play with the little bits in between where Orwell gives us clues of what society's like, or what's going on around Winston, but they're not necessarily fleshed out. And actually, I thought there was loads of opportunities there to sort of make that active and dramatic. So yeah, it was such a amazing project to be involved with.
So around how you approached all of that kind of peripheral stuff, I mean, that's one thing that really struck me, was how dense and rich the rest of the world was around just Winston and what's going on inside his own head and his own experience. How much of that did you script in advance, or how much of it was kind of ad-libbed in the recording process?
Quite a lot of it was scripted. I even scripted a lot of sort of the background conversation. I scripted all the news reports. So I had to write up loads of like these like invasion stories, these basically like colonialist stories, but where everybody was like celebrating being colonized, you know, all around the world. There's this 24-hour news cycle vibe going on the whole time, which we know now is that's what life's like, you know. So we had constant breaking news, and it's a mix between either terror or joy of, you know, the colonialists taking more land for Oceania.
Comrades, this is Big Brother. I am here for you. I am always here to protect you, to watch over you, and I am always watching. Now, say our slogan proudly with me. War is peace.
War is peace.
Freedom is slavery.
Freedom is slavery.
Ignorance is strength.
Ignorance is strength.
I wrote everything in. Yeah, I wrote a lot of it in. I really wanted to give the proles a stronger sort of like sense of identity. You know, in the book, there's sort of it's not a disdain, but there's sort of a distance to them from that third person narrative who looks at the proles as these sort of kind of caricaturish sort of. I feel like sort of Elizabethan, you know, sort of poverty, I guess, study of poverty or something. And I was like, everyone calls them the proles. They should have a nickname for the ingsoc as well. Like, they have lives and they all get to talk to each other. They can have thoughts on politics and war, and they can sort of make fun of it all a bit, like how ridiculous these people are that are trapped in this machine. So it was really fun to sort of to flesh out that world. And it's a world where like hangings are going on regularly in, you know, parks next to playgrounds, and there's constant bombings, and like it's a world at war. And it felt really interesting to go in there via Winston and experience those sort of people and their perspective on everything as well.
So Destiny, I understand this is your first experience working on something audio only as well. How was it?
Yeah.
How was the process for you, and how does it differ to what you're used to?
It wasn't as different as I thought it was going to be, actually. I was a bit like, you know, I as you say, like I'd never done it before. So I was a bit like, why me sort of thing. But then I thought, you know what? Let me try it. Let's see what it is. And then it was, you know, then it became what it was. But it wasn't that in the beginning. It was 1984. It's a classic book. I figured it would be fun. And then it grew and grew, which is amazing. But it wasn't that different in that my job as a director, there was no difference. It was exactly the same. The only difference for me was that I had to, because it's pure directing in a way. Because when you're directing on set, everything is you have to consider everything. You know what I mean? The color of the curtains, the clouds in the sky, the light, everything. Whereas, which is great and amazing, but here it was just pure one-on-one with the actor, which is my favorite part of my job, is directing actors. So I was like, wait, this is nice. Like I really like this. I'm not thinking about anything else but this. So I really loved that. I think the only thing I had to change was the way that I sort of like, for instance, when I'm on set, I'm looking at faces. I'm constantly looking at the face, at an actor's face, because I can tell when by how the actor looks when they're saying a certain line. For me, I feel like I can tell if it feels like a lie. You know, you can argue all of it is a lie, right? But an actor's job is to somehow turn the lie into a truth. And excellent actors can do that. And their face tells you that. Whereas here, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like when I was in the booth with Andrew, especially Garfield, I know there's two Andrews, so that's gonna be because Garfield, I know that he's so emotive in his facial expressions, like as we all know. So I knew I couldn't look at this guy when I'm directing, when he's saying his lines, when he's going through it. So I figured what I would do was that I would look down when they performed. Because for me, because I'm so used to looking at faces, I feared, and this is my first one, I didn't want to fuck it up, you know what I mean? So I feared that I'd be in the booth and I would look at their face and think that I've got it. Oh, I've got it. It was great. It's amazing. Just because they raised their eyebrow or something, which is what I usually do. So I just thought, just block out that sense then and just look down. And so I'm just listening to them the way that the audience would be. And then I could tell what I wanted, you know, what I wanted from a different take, if I wanted a different take, if I wanted to keep playing, just by how they sounded. That's literally the only difference in terms of my approach to directing them. And I loved it. We're in the canteen. Mm-hmm. You're with Simon. You know, she's a goody two shoes. You like her. You don't mind her. Mm-hmm. Okay? And then it's all good until she talks about getting rid of the words in the dictionary. Great. And then that for you is when you're like, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. That's when you change.
Okay, great. Ready?
All right. And action.
Oh, I meant to ask, how is the Newspeak dictionary getting on?
Double plus good. I'm on the adjectives. It is fascinating. We're getting the language into its final shape, the shape it's going to have when nobody speaks anything else.
It's very intimate. It's like very kind of, it's just you and the actor and this excellent material, and you're playing with it. And that's what I like to do, whether I'm on set, on film, television, or this, is just make sure that the actor is playing, that they've got enough space to play, because that's the only time I'm truly surprised, you know. It makes it fun for me because I have an idea of what it sounds like, how it should be. And then you give them an opportunity to play, and then they can do something completely different. And you're like, shit, I never would have thought of that. That's amazing, but we'll choose that one. So yeah, no, different and not different at all would be the short answer to that question.
It's worth saying as well, because we record the lead actor separately, partly because it's great for Dolby, but also it's also part of the kind of secret of how we get high profile people involved. So it does mean that you have that incredible one-on-one relationship with that actor in the booth, and they're getting really intense direction. And, you know, believe it or not, we've had so much feedback about the chemistry of all those main characters, and they weren't even in the same room together, but because Destiny had this experience with them so closely and was so involved with them on every single actor as they recorded, there was this ability then for Nathan and his team to edit it together. So you would never, ever, and I honestly will eat my own glasses if anyone ever said to me that I could tell they weren't in the same room, because I definitely think you can't. And that's testimony to that kind of one-on-one direction, that really intense process that they were able to go through, which is great.
And just to add to that as well, I think that because with Joe and with Destiny, we sort of very early on got to collaborate together and go through the script and actually picture and bring out the world as much as we could. Therefore, when you go into that studio situation, in a way, you've already lived it and experienced it. So therefore, it's kind of when you do close your eyes, you're seeing and hearing the world in your mind. So that was great. And it's something like that we try and do, and Audible really gave us the opportunity to come in early and collaborate from as soon as the script arrived, start that collaboration. That was absolutely key.
It's also worth mentioning what that does to a performance. I mean, we've spoken about this, Destiny, but like doing Room 101 separately with Andrew Garfield first, laying that down and how intense that was. And then a week and a half later, doing it with Andrew Scott and doing the sort of other side of it, from the torturer's position, and how sort of enjoyable it became.
You know what's in Room 101, Winston. Everyone knows what's in Room 101. Sweet dreams.
Perfect. Cut there. Beautiful. It was so weird. I still talk about that to this day, because I learned a lot about myself on those two occasions, because when we were recording Andrew Garfield, it was horrific. Like, I don't like doing, I'm there to service the story, but it's not enjoyable to record or shoot torture. Do you know what I mean? I really don't like it. I do it, but I don't enjoy it at all. And Andrew really went for it. Like, hopefully you've heard it already, but he really went for it. I think I only did it twice, if that. It was just horrible. And I remember Joe coming in the room to check on it. He was like, "Are you all right?" And we were like, "No." You know what I mean? It was just not pleasant at all. And I was just not, like, I think I was even shaking, like, I didn't enjoy it. He was brilliant, but I didn't enjoy it at all. A week later, I'm recording it with Andrew Scott, and he's O'Brien now. He's the torturer, and I'm not looking forward to this scene at all because I know what it entails. I know how it made me feel. It was horrid. Only this time, when it's Andrew Scott, I'm like, wait a minute, this is amazing. I was just like, suddenly I'm O'Brien. Suddenly I'm in O'Brien's head. So I'm like, how else can we make it even more disturbing? I'm like, Andrew, maybe if you say it like this. It was just odd. It was so strange. I stepped out of that room. I was like, what is going on? Like, why am I enjoying this? It was because he was so delicious. He was deliciously evil. It was my favorite type of evil performance. You know what I mean?
No exit. And when I press this lever, the door of the cage will slide up, you see, and these starving brutes will shoot out like bullets right into your face. God! Oh, please! This was common punishment in Imperial China, Winston. The rats will leap onto your face and bore straight into it, Winston. Sometimes they attack the eyes first. Sometimes they burrow through the cheeks and devour the tongue. Anything, save me, please. I'm pressing the lever, Winston.
Take my place, Julia.
No, Winston.
In 3.
It's the only way.
2.
I love you.
1.
And I loved it. And that's when I was like, I don't know like, I wanted it to add more and make it even more creepy and more this, and he did it. And it was just odd. I remember I said, I don't understand why I'm enjoying this. And he was just like, I think it's because you're an empath. And I was like, okay, I don't know if I'm one of those, but it would explain a lot because I just don't understand how. Yeah, it was just really weird. I really did question myself on the way home because I just didn't understand how I was loving. I mean, when I say loving, like, I loved it. I wanted to keep I wanted to keep going, and yeah. So it was, but that's what I mean about it. Like, you get to play when you're doing audio dramas. You get to play when you're on set too, but it's just
there's a lot of freedom.
It's different. You get to, like, and you're in this dark room. It's just this sound, like this. It's like you're in when they speak. It's like I'm in their head when they're talking. It's just outrageous how clear and concise everything was. That was something.
And from the actors' experience, did you get a sense of how they enjoyed the process? I mean, for them, some of them might have been their first experience of working on something like this. You hear quite a lot from actors across the board that some of them struggle quite a lot on green screen sets, for example, where there's no visual reference. And my immediate kind of thought would be, when you take away all visual reference and other actors in the room and things to play off of, then it might be an even more extreme version of a green screen set. But then I think I was wondering whether complete removal of a camera from the recording studio or the set, if you like, I can imagine that could be quite freeing, actually.
It was. I think it's that, because when you're acting in front of a green screen, somebody is telling you to act against something that's not there. Like, look at something that's not there, which can be a bit, you know what I mean, disconcerting at times. Here, it's just close your eyes and be there. you know, and when you close your eyes and you're somewhere, we've all done it. I've done it to the point where I'm like, I believe I'm in a different world. Your imagination can be that thick, you know, because you've removed everything. And I remember Andrew Garfield saying, it's really free. You can just free yourself to the experience. You can, because it was his first, when I first met him, he was just like, you know, I've never done this before. I was like, I've never done it before either. So I guess we're in the same boat. We'll figure it out together. And thankfully I think we did. But I think they feel quite free doing it because it's just them. And it's just me saying, you know, one more time this way or whatever. But we're in it, and it's not as taxing as, you know, there's a big monster coming towards you, and you know what I mean, and you've got to physically perform in front of something that's not there. Is my opinion on that.
Can I ask a question? So you recorded Andrew Garfield first. So when you were doing Andrew Scott,
yeah,
was he hearing Garfield's performance?
No, we had stand-ins. So we'd have a performer in a different room, so there's no distractions, and they had an in-ear so that they're performing against somebody live. But that stand-in would have heard, sort of like, kind of heard what we did with Andrew Garfield, if that makes sense. 'Cause we had excellent stand-ins that were actually in the show as well, but they came in and were stand-ins for us so that they could perform live against something.
And that's the process that we use quite often for lead roles in audio dramas, partly because scheduling and availability can be really tricky, but also so that actor who is coming in gets that really focused experience that you were talking about, Destiny. So they come in, and the stand-in actors, as you say, they are these incredible actors who you book the same stand-ins across the whole production, so they really know how to pitch their performances, but they're completely separated. So they do still have someone to bounce off, but it's not necessarily the whole ensemble cast there all the time, which obviously is a slower process, but also can be a kind of slightly distracting process.
Here, this is me. This is my hand, my leg, my breast. Feel that. I'm real. I'm solid. Don't you like this?
Of course.
Then stop talking about dying and find something to live for. You can arrange the next place for us to meet. Until then, goodbye, Winston Smith.
What you really wanted to say was, the more you have, the more they can take away from you.
And then to get the synergy, you kind of have to remember what you did before. Because then I can, so that it's not so, you know what I mean? So I kind of have to remember what I did with Julia. And then or what I did with Andrew, so that when Julia comes in, there's a sense, obviously she brings her own idea of what the character is, but there's like a sense of, oh, I think I remember what that was. I remember how that scene was, so I know what I need from this scene, so I can direct them more.
And we do play stuff back sometimes, you know, if it's possible,
Sometimes,
play it back or listen to it back or whatever, you know. And I guess in a dream world, if everyone had all the time in the world, we would potentially have everyone together in the room. But we've found that this process works so well and gives everyone a really unique individual experience, and also allows us to get Andrew Garfield, who is one of the busiest actors in the world, to come in and record with us at a time that's convenient for him, which is valuable, obviously.
We played that opening of Andrew Garfield, the opening pre-credits scene to Andrew Scott before we started. And it was the first time I'd heard it as well. And I had to act so cool, like I'd heard it a million times, and I wasn't losing my mind at how good it sounded in front of Andrew Scott, just being like, yeah, this is every day. Massive shout out, by the way, to John Sackville and Alex Wilton Regan, who were our main stand-ins.
The stand-ins were incredible.
Excellent. They were excellent stand-ins.
Yeah, incredible.
And excellent actors. They were in the show.
So we will always give the stand-ins roles in the productions, anyway. But that in itself is a really skilled kind of role to play, actually.
I 100% agree. I could not have told you listening to the show that it was all recorded separately and pieced together. So yeah, fantastic work.
It's gone on viral on TikTok because of their chemistry in that scene, and I'm like, haha, they weren't even in the same room. I love it though; it's amazing.
Absolutely, and yeah, I suppose testament to Nathan and the team at Granny Eats Wolf for the kind of editing and world building that went on. I mean, this is an incredibly rich, incredibly dense world. Necessarily so, I think, to really convey the sense of place and presence and Winston and kind of following him through his life. So at what kind of point did you start actually putting sounds on a timeline? You said you were involved quite early on, but when did that really start in Anger?
Just before we recorded, we wanted to make sure we created some scenes so that everyone sort of got a starting vibe of what it could be. But very early on, we had to sort of plan out tones and emotional moods that we'd want to hand over to Elan and Matt for them to go away and create this incredible world that they did. But also plan out what, for the sound design, Destiny was sort of inputting all these kind of sources from films. What can we play with? What can we bring in? How can we make it really relevant? And those discussions happened very early on. When it comes to the actual sound design itself, I think because we knew we were working with Dolby Atmos, we knew, and Joe had created this brilliant internal monologue creative concept, which just lends itself perfectly when you have that mono voice that is directly in the middle of your head, surrounded by 360 sound field. It's just absolutely perfect. So we knew that going in. We knew what we had to capture. We knew all the sort of different walla we needed to bring to this. And yes, we did a lot of planning, then go into the record stage, and we were able to sort of just capture everything we need. And yeah, when it comes to sound design, then once you get all the pieces, you sort of start building, which is the fun bit. Yeah.
Big hanging at Victory Square. This would be the perfect place to talk to the dark-haired girl. I followed her out of work to the base of Big Brother's column. She looked at one of the lion statues which sit at the bottom. But just as the Eurasian prisoners were taken up to the gallows, I lost sight of her.
There's very clear and very distinct worlds that the show and the characters in the show inhabit. What was the kind of thought process about ensuring that those were differentiated enough? Again, we kind of come back to kind of filmic kind of thinking of there's visual assistance to make sure that things are separate enough, distinct enough that the audience knows where they are. How did you approach that part of the process?
Yeah, I mean, I will hand over to Elan on a lot of that, because what we set out was we looked at, if you looked at sort of dictatorships over the last few decades, what's their look and feel, their identity, and it's not bleak and dystopian as has been portrayed. It's not grey. It is very bright, vibrant. It's encompassing. It's welcoming. But we needed to reflect the coldness of the world, and I think that was Destiny. You were really keen on. Okay, you have the coldness. There's going to be areas of coldness. There's going to be areas where you feel very safe, and you probably shouldn't. And then we want to create this feeling of sort of arousing emotion when you in the world of Big Brother. And really, that was what we centered on. And then we were able to sort of say to Matt and Elan, okay, so what world do you want to build in within that? And they sort of came back with the magic.
So Elan, the incredible score co-created by yourself and Matthew Bellamy. I'm sure our audience will be familiar with his work in the band Muse. I've always been fascinated about the collaboration process around composition, different dynamics and different ways of working. Did you and Matt have clearly defined roles in this process? Were you ever in the same room together?
Oh, yeah. We were, I mean, we'd known each other a long time and had discussed collaborating on things before. It had never really worked out until until this project. And we spent our first few meetings together, working through, throwing ideas at each other, and it was, I'd say, it's actually hard to say, but a lot of the music was genuinely just a complete collaboration. An idea that Matt gave me, that I worked on, I handed back to him. And then some things were just more clearly my work, and Matt made some kind of a contribution to it. And other things were Matt's work that I made a contribution to. And then, of course, there were a couple of adaptations of already existing news tracks. But it was a very genuine and very happy and exciting collaboration for us.
Considering this is a book that was first published in, I think, 1949, envisaging a futuristic world in 1984, which was, I think, 35 years hence. We're now 40 years on from that. So in terms of kind of placing the kind of time frame of the world and this kind of 1940s, 1950s vision of the future, was that something that you thought hard about in terms of placing the instrumentation and the mixture between obviously the classical score element and then the kind of more electronic parts of the score?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting is that it's both in the future and in the past. So it's almost like an alternate timeline or something, and being able to play with that is really fun, so you can make some things contemporary, you can make some things futuristic, and you can make something's a little old fashioned. And so we wanted to use synth sounds from the 80s, and some of the pop elements in it are very capture a feel of 80s pop music, and then some of the classical material is just quite traditionally classical, and then there was also some very contemporary electronic material. So you really got to play with all of that, and when you put all of those different elements together, and I think this is true across everyone's work on the project. When you get to play with all those different elements, you really get to create a very familiar world, but a very other world. And so it was a very rich place from which to be creative from.
And of course, recording at the iconic Abbey Road Studios, there's something incredibly physical about being in the room with an orchestra. And I think I was listening back to the show in preparation for today, and the arrest sequence in particular, there's something that really translates with the kind of, you can feel that physicality of the music in that sequence. I mean, most of the last third of the program is pretty stressful, but that bit in particular, you can really feel that through the music. I think that part in particular really stood out.
Well, I think that there's just something to be said for performance, and when you have a lot of people in a room together, and of course they know the project, and they I'm sure all of them, certainly most of them, if not all of them, would have read 1984, and the titles of the music would have given them an idea of what parts they were playing. And so you have all that energy coming from 70 people in the room to help create that emotion. And I think my job is to create the support the emotional narrative, tell the emotional story through music, and the players in the orchestra, their job is to imbue that with emotion. And I think that really comes across, and that's why we still, across a whole variety of mediums, still work with orchestras, because you're bringing the soul of that performance, the soulful performance, to the artwork.
It's the best music we've ever worked with. I think it's so rich, and bringing together those different worlds makes it feel, as you say, familiar, but so contemporary, so modern. It just strikes at the heart instantly. and yeah, we tried to use as much as we could. We didn't have those kind of 3-minute long wide shots you do in movies, but we tried to use it because it's just so great and it adds so much to the story.
The other thing that I wasn't expecting, having, I read it as a teenager at school, and then I reread it when I knew I was doing the project, and there is something, Orwell's world is quite drab and grey, and that has been the traditional way of presenting it. And I think, Joe, what you did with it, and Destiny, what you brought out of it was this really colourful world, and that gave Matt and I the opportunity to do something colourful with the music, and also much more emotive. These people aren't allowed to show their emotions in the world they live in, but they are exploding with emotion on the inside. And so we were able to do that with the music. And I hadn't initially thought that was where we were going to go with it, but it was brilliant that we could go there with it.
You might watch one of the thousands of telescreens in what they call audience data, which is actually just surveillance.
Reporting 8288, Butler, Emery Villas, Cubicle 405, unorthodox behavior.
Reporting 5152, Foley, Ministry of Plenty, Department 12, microphone enhanced.
Requesting rewrite squad for work on spanking story.
I think it's really interesting you mentioned this idea of kind of colour and being a more technicolor rather than a drab experience. I think my experience of listening to this, it made it feel even more possible somehow. It didn't feel like you were reading something which was a distant future that was unrecognizable. It made it feel a lot more possible, which I think adds to the emotion and the stress. I think I definitely found it a very stressful listen in the best possible way.
It's intense for sure. Yeah.
In terms of piecing together the show as a whole, then, I mean, thinking about how films and TV shows, visual effects sequences in particular, would be very heavily storyboarded. I can imagine that the timeline of a show like this is going to be pretty elastic. I mean, because you don't have specific shots you have to hit, you can really let the performances kind of run. I was really struck by how long we spent with Winston while he's kind of having a bit of a breakdown and kind of panting, and the kind of all of the kind of emotive stuff that's coming out of Andrew's performance. You get to enjoy that, but I also expect when you're scripting, you don't really necessarily know how long these sequences are going to be. So I'm interested to see how that impacts across all the different disciplines here. So obviously with the music and the composition, do you know how much time you need to fill? Like, how are you kind of approaching cueing things?
Unlike a film, you're not when you work with a film, the film is to a greater or lesser extent complete. There's you're at least 50% of the way through the edit by the time you're typically composing the film. And so actually the medium is, of all the mediums, it's perhaps the most restrictive, because whatever it is that you've written, whatever melody you've made, you have to make that fit within the structure of what's happening on the screen. You've got to fit in with the rhythm and the timing of the edit, the rhythm of the performances, and that is learning how to do that. That's all craft, and that takes a long time to learn how to sit with all of that. But when you write music for video games and audiobooks, and this was my first audiobook, then really you go away and you write the music, a little bit more just in your head, right? You don't have to respond. There isn't a performance to respond to. You're responding to the script, and and then we handed the music over and in separate elements, and then that could be taken apart and restructured to go into into the audiobook, and then the final part of that process was that we'd listen back, and if there was something I thought that I could help or improve or change, then I did. But actually, there wasn't. Nathan did a brilliant job of it, so there wasn't that much to do.
I think in terms of script stuff, I write very sort of visually first, instinctively visually, and then sort of consciously in the sound world afterwards. But I think it gives a lot of clues then for performance, like the way in which, let's say, Winston's the emotional arc of Winston as he's being tortured, and he goes through so many different things, from fearing and hating O'Brien to sort of loving him in moments, and a lot of that is easy to just write into the dialogue, but also into the sound world, seeing it visually as a visual performance. And as long as you sort of code it with audio clues, I think we have to sort of keep referring to where we are spatially, and he's got sort of like, he's bound to the chair. So you have to make these little references to, like, I can't move my arm. You just need to give audience clues. But except for that, really, it's the performance that does so much of the sort of visual storytelling, and or at least can bridge the gap between an audience listening and an actor playing it. But, one thing I've learned from this in a major way is to write whimpering into everything that I do from now on. Two sexy men to whimper. Maybe it's worth briefly talking about this. The thing that you don't expect to go viral when you're rewriting 984 is people who find the torture scene the sexiest thing on the internet. Wasn't the intention, but I'm grateful. Yeah. Going into everything else I do now.
Let's pretend it was. Yeah.
It's why you capture all those extra breaths. Okay, we need some sexy breaths, nervous breaths.
How important those extra breaths are. That was so funny. My friend sent it to me. She said, Destiny, like, the girls on TikTok are going to bed to your work. So here I was like, oh my God, they're listening to 1984. This is amazing. Young people on TikTok listening to it. When I clicked it, it was this young woman that was just like, this is me going to bed to Andrew Garfield and Andrew Scott in 1984. And they've taken a snippet of the torturing, and because of the whimpering, it sounds sexual, and you just got Andrew Scott's beautiful voice just over it. And I'm like, guys, this is torture, guys. It's not what you...
But that's why there couldn't be anyone to play that role better than him, I think, because he can do sinister and sexy like no one else at the same time. And when sitting there listening, you're like, oh God, this is so weird, because he's awful but also sexy at the same time. And I think we got it really lucky with the casting of that particular role, because he was, he couldn't have done it better.
So funny. I was reading the comments. I was laughing my ass off. I could not stop reading the comments. I got TikTok just to read the comments. I couldn't stop laughing.
There are sort of hints in the story. I'm kind of glad for it. There are hints of the story. Winston is obsessed with O'Brien, he hears his voice in his head. It's sort of an infatuation. It's almost like a schoolboy crush. He remembers the times he's seen him in 12 years in the ministry, and it's not that hard to then nudge it just a little bit further, particularly when he's being intimate with Julia, that he's also sort of thinking about O'Brien.
In terms of the casting, you have a huge all-star cast, some fantastic names. Were these people that you had in mind from the get-go?
Yeah, when we get set about casting, we always kind of look at the dream casting to start off with, and we knew from the very beginning that this ambitious project was going to need an ambitious cast. We talked specifically about our Winston needing an actor who can do that kind of inner and exterior voice, and a Julia who can really kind of bring strength to that character, which was what we needed. And And the O'Brien character was great for us because it is essentially a cameo. But it's such an important role, and Destiny was really clear that she was like, I want him to sound like you would trust him, like you would trust him if he said, do what I say. So we were kind of working out what to do, and we had the most fantastic time recording with Tom Hardy. But casting this actually, casting this was a joy actually in so many ways, because so many people, like already the caliber of it, the project with Matt and Elan involved, and with Granny Eats Wolf and Joe, like already it was a really appealing project. And actually so many people, know this title, love this title anyway. So, I don't like to say that my job was easy, but actually in this process, like we, couldn't have asked for a better project to kind of reach out and approach these people. And, Andrew Garfield to be willing to do his first ever audio project with us was fantastic, and it was amazing. And so, it was, we kind of put together a list of our dream people working with Destiny to kind of see who you want. And then, you work through that list. But we were really lucky that pretty much our first choices for everybody said yes. So it was great.
And they came prepped. They were like really on it in terms of, which isn't always a guarantee in audio drama.
You don't always get that. No. Sometimes they arrive on the first day and they're like, what am I doing? What's this again? And, and then it's a lot of work on the director in the room to kind of really lead that ship and work. But yeah, they were prepped. And Andrew Garfield particularly, like, he had done his homework and he came in with his performance kind of ready, and which was fantastic. Yeah. And Tom Hardy as well. Like, we didn't necessarily have that long with him to record, but he came with ideas, and he was like, I'm thinking about this voice. What do you think? Or, and it was fantastic for him to have thought so much and put some really intelligent thinking behind what he thought Big Brother should sound like.
Big Brother, yeah, he really was good. He was like, he really enjoyed. I just loved how much they enjoyed it. Like they really liked playing, and they were prepped. Cynthia, she had her ideas about Julia, and we kind of ran with it and shaped it together because we hadn't met before. That's the thing. I hadn't met you. That's what's great about it, that they came with ideas, because we didn't have a chance to like do rehearsals or anything like that. So they had their own ideas of what to do, what they wanted, how they wanted to approach the character. And Cynthia had her version of Julia, and we shaped that and made that work. And I think she sounds fantastic. Tom Hardy had ideas as well, and that was a fantastic recording session, because he's so funny, and I don't know. I think I just envisioned Bane. So I was like, it was like a great, he's really funny and very charming. And that's what I wanted from Big Brother. I wanted Big Brother to sound like a Big Brother. I felt that if Big Brother sounded like how you imagined, which is like someone from the monarchy or something like that, and very kind of like, nobody today would listen to that. Like, I know I would never listen to that. So I knew he had to kind of seduce his audience, and the audience just happens to be, society, like civilization. And he really went for it, and he played with it a lot, and that was really, really fun.
Yeah, he was very generous with us, wasn't he? Very generous with his time, but with, the performance and, his thoughts about it and stuff. It was great.
Yeah, I loved talking with him. I thought he was he just, lots of things, a big character, which I love. I love people that have big characters. And the same with Andrew Scott. Andrew Scott, I think it was Joe that said this, and I've been saying it over and over again because it's like the perfect phrase for it. And he just sounded like jazz, like the actual music of jazz, because his voice would go up and you just didn't know where he was going. So it was just like, I'd throw a word of direction and then he would just like fly. And that was a joy to watch and listen to, because I would look up occasionally and it was like, it's like he was composing or something. It was
so much texture. He brings so much nuance texture. And texture to the performance. Yeah,
that's a wonderful word for it. So much texture to it. And Andrew Garfield as well, like would contour, you know what I mean? Like he'd put his whole body into it.
To distribute habit-forming drugs, to encourage prostitution, disseminate venereal diseases, to do anything likely to cause demoralization and weaken the power of the party. Are you prepared to do that? You will have to get used to living without results and without hope. You will work for a while, and then you will be caught, and you will confess, and you will die. We will try our very hardest to get a razor blade to you before you're tortured.
And to be honest, that's something that we really push for. I think we here are so keen on hyper-real performance and physical performance. And the last thing we want is an actor to come in and feel intimidated by the microphone and deliver these perfect, crisp lines, which are immaculate but have no humanity to them. So sometimes it's great to work with actors who've never worked in audio before, because they just come without any kind of mic technique. They just come and perform, and then the tech gets it all right and make sure we capture everything. But we have these amazing performances, which I think we definitely got here. And there's been so much compliments on the naturalistic performance and the believability of it. It doesn't feel anything like stuff that's gone before in audio, I think, which is great.
It's because there's so much surprising choices as well that someone both Andrews understand implicitly is not just harmony of text, but sort of discord as well, and those moments of humor, particularly Andrew Scott, finding moments of sort of almost camp humor in the bits where he was asking Martin. It sounds like he's asking for a cup of tea, but he's telling him to be electrocuted higher or whatever. And Andrew Scott just and that play, it's that bits that sound right, and you sort of come home to, and you're that's a sort of safe delivery. And then these spikes of discord, which is humor or a sudden anger or a snarl or whatever it is. And Andrew Garfield found it too, actually, in his sort of sardonic humor. There were these tiny little turns every now and then that you just go, wow, where did that come from? And it's so exciting, and I just think it keeps it really alive all the time.
His interactions with it's Parsons, Ramesh Ranganathan's character,
who, by the way, what performance,
I knew he could play Parsons in his sleep. Just from watching his stand-up, I knew he could do that. And he was great at it. But without too many spoilers, there's a moment where he has to kind of show real fear. And he killed it. I just did not see that coming. He killed it. And then when he was done, he was like, good, cool, great. What I mean? I was like, what's happening? It was just outrageous. It was great. Him, Natasha as Mrs. Parsons. It was just, dream cast, truly.
It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to all of you about 1984. I can tell just from the way that you're recounting your stories and your memories of working on this production that it was a thoroughly enjoyable production to be involved in. And so thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
It's been a while since I've heard something quite as immersive and transporting. So congratulations on a fabulous show, and thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Many thanks to today's guest host, Richard, as well as all of our guests who helped put together this impressive production. As I mentioned up top, this Audible original presentation of George Orwell's 1984 is now available to listen to in stunning Dolby Atmos on the Audible app. We will have links, as always, in our show notes. And if you'd like even more conversations with artists and filmmakers about how they use technology to tell their stories, please be sure you are subscribed to us, the Dolby Creator Talks podcast. You can find links to our show on all the major podcasting platforms, including the video version on YouTube, in our show notes. Or you can simply search for Dolby, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're curious to know more about the Dolby Institute, head on over to dolbyinstitute.com. There you'll find information about all of our programs. You can access the entire library of episodes of this podcast, and you can sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, this is Dolby Creator Talks. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. Our producer and editor is Michael Coleman. Our executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry, with additional editing by Matt Nixon. And our production coordinator is Karen Marroquin. Thank you for joining us.